Welcome to Home Run Hiring. I'm your host, Andrea Hoffer. So today we're going to talk about what I consider a difficult topic. It's a topic that we never really talked about when I went to business school. I rarely hear it even discussed at business seminars and business events. Yet I think it's something that a lot of us as business owners have had to deal with or may have to deal with, unfortunately, in the future. And what we're going to talk about today is what to do when one of your employees, one of your team members passes away. And before I introduce our guest who we have with us today, who's an expert on this subject, and I can't wait to introduce you to her, I just want to briefly share why I chose this topic today. Many years ago, I owned a fairly busy spa. I had a team of about 35 employees, and one of my team members who was covering the closing shift on New Year's Eve, when she was driving to meet her family to celebrate the holidays, a reckless driver hit her and she was killed. And, you know, that just, it was just really, really sad. And a lot of emotions came up throughout my team and for me as well. And I knew that I needed to be there to support my team through it the best that I could. But I also needed to think about my business as well. It was a very busy time for my business. It was a time when kind of key for making revenue goals. And I wasn't sure the best way to approach everything. And I knew, you know, the family had suffered a great loss, but so did my team members. And I didn't know how to be there for them. And so that's one of the reasons I really want to talk about this today, because I'm sure back then, you know, I did the best I could. I may have made some wrong choices. Hopefully I made some good ones as well. But today we have a guest with us who's going to help us talk through some of the things that we might face and that we might need to do if, you know, if unfortunately we're faced with this situation as a business owner, as an employer, and quite honestly, as a person. So here with us today is Sara Makin, the CEO and founder of Makin Wellness, the highest rated online therapists and counselors in Pennsylvania. And before I bring her on, I want to just tell you a little bit about this amazing woman. Since establishing her company in 2017, she's led Makin Wellness to its position today as the state's fastest growing and privately owned telemental health company, achieving rapid growth and mental health utilization. Under her leadership, Makin Wellness has established a proven track record of successfully shaping the mental health market and driving mental health transformation by executing on their mission of helping millions of people heal and become happy again. Sara Makin has been featured in major media outlets, including NBC, ABC, Fox, the CW, International Business Times, the Scientific Journal, and hundreds more media sources internationally. She's been named a top 100 healthcare leader in 2019 and an empowering woman in philanthropy in 2018. Sara has been on the cover of Inspiring Lives magazine, Dispense magazine, Pittsburgh Avenue West, and Steal This magazine. Nationally recognized as a trailblazer in the virtual mental health care field and 2 times best-selling author, Ms. Makin is fueled by a relentless desire to improve virtual mental health outcomes and provide the masses with outstanding mental health care. Wow, you are quite impressive, Sara. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to being here and to help your audience with the grief process and with providing some psychological information that can be helpful for a lot of business owners.
Thank you. Thank you. And I was wondering, could you start off by sharing with us if you've seen any sort of increase in workplace related grief this year due to the pandemic, and how you and your team are addressing this topic?
That's a really great question, Andrea. This has been a huge challenge for a lot of businesses and a lot of business owners. There has been such an increase in stress levels, increase in marital disputes, an increase in drug and alcohol usage, and overall a major decline in people's mental health since COVID started around this March. And so this will absolutely affect the workplace and the productivity of your team and the efficacy of what they are doing. So this is something that we've seen a lot of patients struggle with, and we know a lot of business owners are also struggling because, you know, on the one hand, they want to be able to support their employees during a challenging time, but on the other hand, they might not know exactly what they would need to do in order to successfully do that.
I can certainly relate to that. What advice would you give an employer who's recently learned that one of their employees has passed away, whether it's from COVID or from something else?
It's a really great question. So this will kind of go back to what policies and procedures you have in place for that, which I'm not an HR specialist to dictate like what it should be or what it should not consist of. But something from like the psych field that would be helpful is including some form of crisis counseling for your company. I've seen some companies do this as a group where they will have a group counselor come and speak with the team, and the team all has time and the capability of expressing their emotions and thoughts and feelings around the crisis that occurred. And this can actually be a really big bonding moment for the participants in the group counseling session, and can really, in some ways, boost morale and boost people's connections to one another. Because many times when tragic events happen, or if someone on your team dies, or someone in your company dies, there's a lot of feelings to process, and it's unexpected the majority of the time for the team. So that could be an option, is providing that. You could hire a counselor to physically come into your office to do this, or given the COVID situation that we have right now, there's a lot of states and specific cities and areas that are predominantly working virtually. And so this type of crisis service could still be done virtually as well. You would just want to ensure that the group counselor is aware of how to do this effectively, because it is different providing services virtually compared to in person. And then the other tip that I would suggest to incorporate into policies and procedures would be to offer individual counseling as well. Many health insurance companies or many employers will offer EAPs or an employee assistance program. And if that is the case and you're already paying for it, sometimes your team would just really need to be reminded to actually use it. Many times it's between, like, we've noticed, typically about 4 to 10 free sessions. And then afterwards, most of these EAP counselors can continue to be seen on a cash basis, or many of them are also network with insurance companies. So that is another option too. To save money with that, I would highly recommend either referring to a therapist or a clinic that is in network with the EAP, and or referring to places that are in network with the insurance company that you offer, to the insurance that you offer to your employees. Because not every therapist or counselor is in network with all, insurance companies. I mean, most of them are only in network with some. So then that way you don't want to accidentally stress out your staff and refer them to a place that doesn't accept your insurance, and then your employees would have to pay a lot of money out of pocket, because it can be quite expensive.
Okay, well, thank you. I didn't even think about the cost involved, but it makes sense. It can get pretty exorbitant sometimes. So if an employer does have an employee who passes away, how would you recommend or suggest that the business owner, the employer, communicates that information, that news to the team? And, is there a best method? I mean, I understand with COVID that sort of limits the ways that, as far as in person goes. But do you have a suggestion on methods and even just what to say and how to approach it?
That's a really great question. And I think this is a really important question that you asked, because the delivery of challenging news can be made even worse if you delivered it in a modality that either downplays it or doesn't really can effectively convey how important the message is. So I think that's really important. Anytime there's a situation where it's negative or challenging, or it can be confusing, or if you know that there's going to be a lot of questions or a strong emotional reaction, it is always best to do it in person if possible, which again, these times that we're living in are this is not how our businesses are typically run, so that's understandable. And so the next best thing would be, if it's possible, to do a group video call, and everyone, essentially, you inform everyone on the team at once, starting out with the leadership first, so they have a heads up. And the way that you would share the information would really be up to you. I think it's important to section in time, if possible, to see what other people's kind of reactions are, and to be able to emotionally support them. If possible, if you're able to have a counselor potentially with you, or to connect with a counselor or crisis counselor beforehand, they can share even more advice specifically regarding every situation, because I'd hate to give this is what everyone should do sort of format, when every situation and every case is different. It's different if someone dies from suicide compared to someone dies accidentally, compared to if they die of natural causes and they were elderly. So it's all very different.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you. And
you're welcome.
I know that one of the things that I struggled with, and I guess even just in personal circumstances, is how to reach out to the family, to express your condolences. What, the timing, even, when's the best timing? How's the best way to express it? I know I struggle with that a lot whenever there's any sort of death around somebody that I know, but particularly as an employer, how do you reach out to your team members, parents or family after they've passed away? And are you intruding? It was a question for me, and I didn't know how to answer it.
It's a tough question to answer, because again, it's all different on a case-by-case scenario. And that's a challenging thing with the field of psychology and mental health. It's so, you have to look at things through the individual's lens and individual relationships lens. And so sometimes these things really vary drastically. And so if you were closer with the person and you feel like a gift or a note or flowers is appropriate, then do that. If you weren't very close with the employer, or if you weren't very close with the staff, or if you weren't really close with the family, I think it's still a good idea as a leader to send something and to let them know that you're there for them, or whatever it is that you want to communicate. That would be a good idea. But ultimately, it's really up to you and what you feel most comfortable with. The other thing to consider is that from a multicultural lens, things can be different with death based upon, again, how the person died and what the faith or culture the family has. Some funerals are mandated to occur like within like a day or a couple of days. And so it can be challenging to looking at it from that lens. So if you're able to, like, if you know, like, that their funeral is going to happen very quickly and they're probably going to be very slammed the first several days, then maybe wait a little bit longer.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah, you're welcome.
then, how do you communicate this to the customers? Because often the customers, depending upon the type of business, may know the employee and may notice that they're no longer there. Is it something that you communicate with the customers, or, as a blank, just kind of letting everybody know, or is it just a case by case if somebody asks about that person?
It's a really great question, and that really depends on your industry and what it is that you're doing and how closely the employee was with the customers, because you don't necessarily want to send out a ton of notifications if that employee wasn't directly involved with the customers. But if they were, it could be good to give the customer a heads up, and to let them know, so then that if they feel like they want to express their condolences as well, that they would be able to, and so that there's no confusion. You don't want them to continually reach out to the person and not get a response and not be informed as to why.
That's a good point. So another question that I struggled with, because this was a busy time when this happened with my business, was, do we close for the funeral so that everybody who wants to go to the funeral can go? And I wanted to attend the funeral as well. And, how do you, and maybe this is more of, there's a lot of variables that have to come into play here, but how do you decide whether or not to close, and how much time to close, and how we communicate that to our clients of why we're closing during a time when we wouldn't typically close?
Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful question. So it's really up to you if you are in an industry where you are able to close. Certain industries, it's really, in certain businesses, it's really challenging. Like, I'm thinking like specifically for like my company, like we're in mental health care, and we have to remain open because of the contracts that we have with our insurance companies. We have to have people on staff and available to answer patients in crisis. So I know that from like my example, I'm sure there's other businesses that aren't able to close. So if you're not able to close, at least doing your best to be flexible with the staff that were really close with them, that really want to attend, and do everything in your power to make that happen. If you're able to close, and for everyone to go, or everyone that was invited to attend, that would be great. And it's really up to you what it is, whatever it is that you want to state as your reason why you're closing publicly. You don't necessarily have to post about that, because again, the family might not feel very comfortable with you publicly sharing that information as well. Because it's different when you speak with someone one-on-one, like when we talked about talking with the customers that work closely with the person, compared to if you're sharing this information publicly or if you're sharing it online. So that's just another thing to consider. If you don't necessarily have to say why you would be closed for the time being.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things that I would think is important is making sure that the business owner, while that person's, trying to support and take care of their team and their business, they also need to take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any suggestions on, while they're balancing everything and during this difficult time, of how they can still take care of themselves so that they can still be, productive and function?
that's great. And, that can be something that I think sometimes business owners and entrepreneurs and executives, sometimes we lose sight, or we forget that we have to take care of ourselves first. And so if you're staying up really late, a lot of nights you're not sleeping well, if you aren't, like if you're ordering a lot of takeout, you're eating unhealthy food, or if you're experiencing a significantly higher level of stress and you're not managing it well, these are not only things that are not good for your health, but it actually negatively will impact your business. If you're not sleeping well, your brain is not actually functioning optimally. And it's actually more dangerous. Or I think I read a study somewhere that said it's dangerous as drunk driving to drive when you're sleep deprived. And so forcing yourself to sleep, even if you feel like I still need to do this, I need to do that, is really important. If you are in a position where you're able to, if you're in a position within your company where you have a team or where you have a leadership team, it's important to delegate as much as you possibly can to them and empower them to handle certain things. So everything isn't relying on you. Another thing with stress reduction is if you start to notice that you're getting really stressed out during the day and it's just constant negative issues coming as a result of this, or your staff is very upset and there's a lot of emotional burden that you're noticing that you're taking on, one thing that our team recommends is to do something called diaphragmatic breathing, which essentially is deep belly breathing. And it's a form of breathing that may help to reduce your heart rate and may help to reduce your blood pressure as well. And so you can Google it online. There's so much information about it, or you can check it out on our website at makinwellness.com. We have videos on how to do it. Implement the diaphragmatic breathing every time you start to notice you're getting stressed out. And again, like forcing yourself, whether you want to or not, to exercise, because that's one way of getting out a lot of negative emotions. And it can really help with reducing your stress levels as well. And it's good for your health. And you have the dopamine release as well, which essentially are the chemicals that make you feel good. And so you want to get as much of that as you possibly can naturally without doing negative things to get them. And so that's a great way of doing that. So focusing on those couple of things. And, if you are getting to a place where that's not working and you need like more assistance, I would definitely recommend seeing a counselor. And sometimes seeing a counselor is just for the short term. It's not always years and years at a time, just to help you with processing through that, because it's a lot. And if your team notices that you aren't taking care of yourself, then they're not going to take care of themselves either, because whether you realize it or not, they really do look up to you, because if they didn't, they would have quit by now. And so as a strong leader, you have to consider that everything that you do, you're setting an example. And even if you're doing things you don't think that people notice, like they do notice. So you have to ensure that you take care of yourself. And if you're taking care of yourself, even despite a challenging time, it's going to be a source of inspiration for your team. And then they'll do that, and then they'll perform even better too.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent advice for year round, no matter, if there's, additional stressors or not. So I kind of would like to dive a little bit, and I didn't mention I was going to ask you this, so I might throw you a little bit, but I don't think so. I'm fascinated by your model of the online therapy. Could you just talk to us a little bit about how that works, and do you get the same therapist each time? And is it video or is it just voice?
It's a great question, and I would love to talk about it. So at Makin Wellness, Our team consists of specialized online counselors that help people that struggle with mental health, with their addiction issues, or with relationship issues. And you would see the same counselor throughout the entirety of your treatment at Makin. There are times where sometimes, like we have a nutritionist, so sometimes the therapist will work with the nutritionist to help to get you back on track. Mm-hmm. So with the way that it works virtually is whenever you call our team are all trained in essentially knowing who to match up, like what clients to match up with who. We have a whole system in place for that. And so they'll ask you a couple of questions and then you'll get matched with a specialist online counselor. And most of it is covered by insurance as well, which is really great. We have partnerships with all the major insurance, with all the major commercial insurance plans within Pennsylvania at this time.
Do you work right now outside of Pennsylvania? Do you have clients outside?
We are only technically able to do coaching outside of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So we're able to do coaching outside of Pennsylvania, but we're not able to do counseling unless you are a Pennsylvania resident at this time. Hopefully regulations and things will change in the future, but we will be expanding outside of our state for sure.
And could you just touch on the difference between coaching and counseling?
Oh yeah.
Any of our listeners don't know.
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. You've done a very good job of putting together great questions. These are all really great.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. So coaching is quite goal directed, and so essentially you would work with the coach to put together an action plan for helping you to meet whatever goals that you may have. Interesting thing with coaching is that there's actually zero regulations around it. Someone who is like a 5-year-old can be a coach and there's no regulations or board or anything. The good thing with our team is that all of our counselors are master's level and up. So you're meeting with someone who has quite extensive education and knowledge about psychology in general. So that really can be a very helpful thing. With counseling, it's a little bit different. It's more you're presenting with a major challenge or issue or an ongoing series of issues, and it's more in depth than coaching is. Think of coaching a bit more as like maintenance, like you've worked on yourself, you've worked on a lot of different things and you're in a place where you're feeling good and you just have extra goals that you want to meet. Versus counseling, it's like you have some challenges that need to be addressed before you can get to that state. And then the other thing is that insurance doesn't cover coaching, which makes sense because there's literally no regulatory bodies or anything behind it to regulate it, but insurance does cover for counseling because it's research backed. Well, the counseling at Makin Wellness, our virtual counseling is backed by research and evidence-based, meaning that we've done tons and tons and tons of research and data collections and tons of things that are not very fun to talk about to ensure that what we're doing is actually working.
Interesting. And you were doing virtual counseling way before the pandemic hit.
Yeah. And it was interesting too, because when we started doing it, there was a little bit of, I don't want to say pushback, but some of people that were more established in this industry thought it was weird or thought, there's no research behind this. And they thought like, you have to see someone in person in order for it to work. And then COVID happens and then they magically change their minds, which I find to be really funny.
I see that happening in a lot of different industries.
Oh yes. It's not a good attitude or mentality to have. You have to always keep your mind, especially because most of your audience is business owners, right?
Correct. Yes.
You have to keep your mind open. You have to consider what the future of your industry can look like and be prepared when things happen. Like I always knew that virtual counseling and telemed was going to become a normative. And so because of that, I set up my company in a way where it allowed for that to happen. And maybe, it was a little bit early, but to me, it was the perfect timing because we spent the first few years really focusing on building the foundation, systems, and processes. But I digress.
No, I think it's wonderful. And it does build in to what we're talking about a little bit, because it's, you kind of foresaw where the pandemic took us. You didn't think that, I'm assuming you didn't know there's going to be a pandemic.
No, not that good.
But, I think what I'm seeing, and as I talk to more and more business owners, especially, is that every place the pandemic has brought us when it comes to different industries, we were going there. Like we were going to get there, whether it was in the next 5 years, 10 years, the pandemic just accelerated us. And
yeah,
it's true for your industry as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So just before I ask you about how somebody can get in touch with you, I first just want to ask, is there anything that we haven't talked about today, related to grief in the workplace that you feel that we should just touch on before we wrap up?
Mm-hmm. I just have one brief thing that I wanted to share pertaining to that. Mm-hmm. Is that when we experience grief or trauma or really negative or challenging circumstances in our lives, the push it down and don't talk about it or don't think about it now approach, or the bottling approach, does not work well. It's never worked well. And when you try to suppress trauma or grief, it's always going to come back up. Don't use alcohol to numb it. Don't, try to distract yourself by working 80-hour weeks. Talk about how you feel, talk about your thoughts and feelings, meet with a virtual counselor, process that so you can heal and move forward and, not be bogged down by a lot of grief unnecessarily, because there's so much positive that can come out of processing these things and not holding on to them. And it's more painful the longer you wait. So that's the number one advice that I would give, especially if you're really struggling with it, or if you see one of your staff struggling with it, like let them know you care about them and that, this would be good for them, and refer them to a place that you trust. And that's what I would highly recommend.
Right. Thank you. I think that's excellent advice. So I think we often do look for a quick remedy, right? And something that's just going to distract us from something that we really need to deal with.
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there, how can they get in touch with you, Sara?
Mm-hmm. So they can follow us online. If you enter Makin Wellness into Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or Pinterest or LinkedIn, you'll be able to find our pages and follow us that way. If you're at a place where you're ready to make a change, or if perhaps you've gone through a challenging situation or circumstance and you're ready to heal and become happy again, give our team a call at 833-274-HEAL. That is HEAL. And our team will be able to match you up with a specialized online counselor that will help you.
Great, thank you. And we'll put your website on the podcast episode if somebody's watching this later. And just for those of you who are listening to it and not watching the video, Makin is spelled Makin. So it's Makin Wellness. So again, thank you so much, Sara, for being here with us today. You've just are a wealth of knowledge, and you're just a pleasure to speak with. And we really appreciate your expertise in this area. And I've just enjoyed speaking with you.
And thank you so much for having me on. And I know this is not the easiest thing to talk about, but this is really important important stuff. We do need to communicate and talk about this because, I mean, everyone dies.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to be a situation that eventually, you know, you probably have to deal with as a business owner. And so having some information beforehand is really important. And thank you for getting this really valuable information out there. I know it's going to help a lot of people.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
you're so welcome.
and thank you to everyone for joining us today for this episode of Home Run Hiring. Please stay safe and happy, and have a great day.